Woodhaven Murders. Some of these you'll know about, some of these you won't. And even the ones you know about, you're going to find out some new things. And I can tell you something about one of the infamous murders here in Woodhaven. You're going to see some pictures of it for the first time that you've never seen. I nearly dropped my hat when I saw these pictures. So you'll enjoy these. So we're in for a good ride of some really horrible tales of Woodhaven's past. You know, I had to actually go through and pick what to use in the presentation and what not. And you know, for those of you joining us from home, I hope you can see that up on the screen. You're not going to be able to read it. We can't read it either. It's just a headline from the Long Island Daily Press. And then over there on the right, over here, Evening Stroll had fatal ending for Vita Nicolese. You know, this was a murder up in Forest Park. Someone who was out for a walk and got murdered. Here is a Woodhaven trial of a gentleman named Joseph Manzo, who was on charge for murder of Andrew Calto-Balletto. And this one was one of the early trials in which they were using fingerprints and everything. This was again was another big trial. And this one here, 2 revenge suspects are refused bail in Woodhaven killing. You know, like any city, you're going to have crime. You're going to have a lot of crime, and Woodhaven certainly was no exception. You know, when people today, you know, these days, whenever there is a crime or an incident, you know, people wet their pants over it. Oh my God, there's crime in Woodhaven, as if we just invented it. But the fact of the matter is, there's been crime in Woodhaven throughout its history, because it's a city, and the newspapers back then did a really terrific job of documenting these crimes. Probably one of the biggest crimes in early Woodhaven days took place in the 20s, and it was this young woman here, Gussie Human, or Humman, I don't know how you pronounce that last name, Humann, and she was accused of murder. So basically what happened here was she had a boyfriend. His name was Harry Garbe, Garbe, and they dated for a while, and then they had a breaking up. And then after they broke up, she started dating this guy, and they make note in here several times that he was an Italian. I have to say, the papers of that era did not look fondly upon Italians, because they actually, whenever they describe it, whenever they say someone was an Italian, they say it as an explanation, not as additional information. They'll say things like, you know, a violent fight ensued, and they said, but you know, so and so was Italian. You know? So Gussie was dating this guy Labacci, and she convinced him that Harry Garbe was harassing her and stalking her. But as it turned out, really, Harry Garbe was pretty much over her. And finally, she was so convinced that he was stalking her instead of ignoring her, that she called him up and said, "We have to meet." And he went to meet her, and when he went to go meet her, Labacci was there and had a gun and shot Harry Garbe. The thing is, when he shot him, he didn't kill him. Not right away. You know, he was not a good shot, but after all, he was an Italian. So Harry Garbe, he kind of stumbled over and fell down, and then when the police got him and took him to the hospital, he was able to identify his killer. So that started this trial here, and this was, you know, kind of like the trial of the century. Gussie became infamous. This was an article over here about mothers in prison. This was also a very hot topic of the 20s, jailing women, because she was pregnant when she was sent to prison. This is a picture of her right here, looking very forlorn in the prison, sitting there waiting to, you know, she didn't get married. No, her husband never married her. But then again, wasn't Italian. So here she is in prison, and again, they had full-page spreads on Gussie, all about her. She was a media darling, and then after a few years, she was sent to she was pardoned and released from prison. Her boyfriend Labachi ended up going to jail for like 15 years, and she went to jail for 2 because he actually was the one who did the killing. But she only served like 2 years in prison, and we're going to come back here. And in the end, she was pardoned. She was reunited finally with her baby, and then eventually she and her baby just vanished. And there was a story in the late 30s when Labachi got out of prison because he went looking for her and couldn't find her. And that's where the story ends. There's no more mention of it. Thank you. Good to see you. Everyone, this is Ike Gilkey. Ike gives walk-in tours, and I gave a great presentation here a couple months ago. And I've got something in this presentation that is going to make you very excited. I can't wait for you to see it.
Oh, I can't wait either.
I can't wait for you to see it. And if Robin were here, she would have heart palpitations at what I'm going to show you. This is something she was asking for.
Oh, I can't wait.
Anyway, we're going to talk here about this murder here. If the Gussie Hummon, if that case was big, the Professor Kotkoff murder was gigantic. So this is the first headline on it. Woodhaven man beaten with iron bar, dying. And it says here, bandits beat and rob teacher of philosophy in lot near his home. He does not survive. His name is Kotkoff. He's a professor, the Jewish professor of religion in the city, and he takes the train every day to and from his job. Now you got to remember, Woodhaven in those days stretched a lot further south than it does now. So what we're talking about in Woodhaven here today is actually Ozone Park. But 4 men are held for murder in Woodhaven. So what happens here is, let me just describe the setting, and we'll be looking at some of the locations here in a little bit. But you have Kotkoff, who gets off the train late at night, comes from the city. It's the A train, not the J. It's the J. The A train. He lives down that way, and he gets off the train over there by 88th Street, that exit, and comes down the steps. There are 4 young men, who are waiting, and they're looking for an easy mark. They're looking for someone that they can beat up and take his wallet, take some stuff. He comes down. It looks like he has a watch. He has a suitcase. He's the guy that they attack. So, as we'll see later on, he used to get off that station and walk. It was 1 block west and 1 block south to go to his home. But in between there was a lot, right on Liberty. There was a lot, and residents had been complaining that this lot was not taken care of, that it was poorly lit, and he would always cut across it. And when you see the maps, you can see that there's a path right from his house to the train station, and it was across there that they chased him down with an iron bar, and they beat him over the head many times, and he ended up going to the hospital where he died. Here's where the story is kind of hinky. He was beaten in this lot. There was a woman who witnessed it from far away across the lot. She called for the police. The police showed up, and they found 2 young men standing at the edge of the lot, watching what was going on. So they said to them, hey, to the 2 young men, come over here and help us pick this guy up out of the snow. We're going to bring him into that house. So these 2 guys come over, they pick up the guy, they bring him into this house, and then when they get in there, some other police officers come in and look at these 2 young men and see that they have blood all over their hands and say, that's interesting, how'd you get blood on your hands? And they said, well, we carried it. Well, I said, well, we're going to want you to come in for questioning. So they went in for questioning, and they said, absolutely, we have nothing to do with it, we have nothing to do with it, we have nothing to do with it. We did it. Suddenly they confessed. They confessed to the murder. The city is outraged by this murder. All across the city, they're calling for swift justice, and extremely swift justice. They want justice now. So they're quickly indicted. It's the two young men, and when the two young men are in there, not only do they confess, but they implicate two other of their friends. So now 4 young men are arrested. 49 days passes from the day of the attack to the arrest to the indictment to the first day of the trial. So that is really, really fast. So the slaying of Professor Katkov is retold. The widow tells how murder blighted their hope. So Professor Katkov's widow comes in. She had 2 children, and she comes in and she just faints during trial, and all. It's really a terrible scene. The first young man right here is the first one to go for trial, Peter Nunziata. No relation to Arlene Annunziata. And he's not a very, very good defendant. He's up there. He's smoking cigarettes in court. He's smirking. He's there's a lot he's not doing to help himself. Woodhaven woman saw a teacher murdered. Murder victim's wife hysterical at trial. So you've got a witness who comes to the trial and talks about the murder that she saw. And what's great about the newspapers back then, the details they went into, they actually print the testimony from the trial that you can read. They print exactly, almost word for word, like a script, what these people say. And she, someone who was quite a distance away from it, did see the man running, attacked by 4 young men, and all that. So, Annunziata, Nunziata, sorry, my mistake, Arlene. Nunziata, his lawyer, says that police actually beat him into a confession. And it says they're clubbed black and blue by the Richmond Hill police. That's the police down at our 102nd precinct. So, what's interesting is, back around 2009, our beat cop here in Woodhaven, Officer Fisher, used to walk the streets. He loved history, and we got into a conversation, and he invited me in for a tour of the 102nd precinct. And when we went up there, he brought out the books, the log books, and you've probably seen these before, but these are these books, and this is what they used to write in and what was going on. And he had the books right from the beginning of the 102nd precinct. And he showed me books from the 20s and stuff. So when I was researching this and I found this, I was like, boy, I'd love to see the books from that night. Just to see what they say. It'd be kind of interesting. And when I contacted the 102nd and I asked them about this, what do you think they said?
Oh, it was lost.
Yeah. Good morning. Good time. We don't have books in. I'm sorry. They're missing. We don't know. I told him, I said, I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. I just would like to see it. I'm kind of curious. So,
It's a souvenir in somebody's basement.
So here we have a boy guilty of killing Katkov, first-degree murder. Nunziata was found guilty, and he is sentenced to die the week of June 13th. So basically, they're looking at from the time of the murder to execution is 112 days. So, people were calling for swift justice, and they got it. The second boy to go on trial, Alfano, his lawyer looked at what Nunziata did and thought, that worked really well, let me try it, and did the same exact thing. The police beat him into a confession, this and that, and he was found guilty of murder, first degree. And he was also sentenced to death. The other 2 young men saw what the first 2 guys got, and immediately said, we're guilty. They pled guilty, they worked out a deal to avoid the death penalty. One of the 4 young men in Verona was just from over here on 85th Street here in Woodhaven. This was, one of the results out of this was the area where Kotkov was killed. The local civic group said, hey, it's too dark, we need more lights. So you know those civic groups are a pain in the neck, always complaining. Right here is the train station. There's the steps.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, so you can imagine Kotkov coming down the steps.
See the person on the steps coming down.
Just like he did all those years ago. Come down the steps, late at night, and they were waiting underneath the steps to see him. Here's the big red X is where the train station is, and this little red dot here, this little red one here, that's his house. So nowadays, right now, there are all houses here and everything like that, so you'd have to go over here and here to get to your house. That's how you'd have to go. But back then, now this is an aerial view from 1924. There was nothing there. That's the dark park they were talking about. And that's the path that he took right there. So when he got off the train, this is the attack. Right here, this yellow thing here is a house that no longer exists. The woman who said she saw the attack, that's where she lived.
What train station?
That's 88th Street Station
Yeah,
on Liberty Avenue.
Liberty
Again,
Avenue.
Ozone Park today, but Woodhaven back then.
Yeah.
Anyone here from Ozone Park?
South Ozone Park, if you
Okay.
want to know. We're
Good park.
originally from Ozone
All right. Ozone Park's the part of Woodhaven we gave away. And here is Kotkov's house today. You know, a nice little house. And this is where he lived, and, you know, he went to work every day and would walk out of the house and go, and then, you know, one night, you know, never to come home, you know. This is today where the lock, you know, was. There's that big blue building you've probably seen if you go down Liberty. So the station was down here. He would usually walk like this, but because there was a lot, he could walk right through there. I don't know if people who are watching live can see the little dot or not. Okay. Anyway, again, that's where that blue building is. So Nunziata stolidly goes to his death. I tell you something, if you read old newspapers, you are going to get an education in vocabulary. They really knew how to write, you know, in the newspapers back then. So it's actually pretty gripping when you read all the details of this. Bai's last meal for Japanese cow in the death house. He gets put to death the same night as a Japanese sailor who, while he was in Manhattan, murdered someone. And the two of them are getting put to death together, but the Japanese guy, he ain't got no money. So they made them pay for their last meal. So he was going to buy himself a last meal, but the Japanese friend, he wasn't getting a last meal. So he used some of his money to buy his friend a last meal, which is kind of touching.
He doesn't need it where he's going. Yeah.
And then, as a favor, you know, to him being really nice when they got up to it, Nunziata told his Japanese friend, "You first. You go ahead first." And he stood there while his friend was put to death, and then he went in, and there it is. You know, this is up in Sing Sing, and there's the electric chair. And what do they call the electric chair? Had a nickname.
Old Sparky.
Old Sparky. And, you know, his family came in to visit him on the night of the execution. And when you read about it, there's a metal draped fence between them. You know, and he's not allowed to touch his family. Not even like a fingertips or anything. They keep them completely separate. And then finally they say goodbye. And, you know, it says here he was trying to comfort members of his family. And then finally, when the guy comes in and unlocks the door, He says to his family, "I am ready." Turns his back and goes to his death. So next, they got to remember, I skipped this one important part. It didn't happen that June. There were appeals and everything, so it happened about 2 years after the killing. So he spent about 2 years in prison. Alfano, just a little bit later, he goes and gets put to death, also in Sing Sing. So 2 of them were put to death. Nunziata is the youngest person put to death at that time in the United States in prison. The youngest one executed. He was 19 years old when he was given the death penalty. He was the youngest person given the death penalty. They since broke that record several times, but he held it at that time. All right. So moving on, the Willow Bar and Grill murder. This was a real sad one, particularly because it happened at Christmas. But any incident like this is sad. It's also particularly galling because the person who did this was a real killer. So this was at the Willow Bar, and if you don't know where the Willow Bar was, in early years, this was a popular ballroom and dancing with entertainment in the Atwood Room. Sounds very, very fancy. George Botts and Jerry Blom at the Wilmax. They had civic meetings there, so they had all kind of public meetings there at the Wilmax. If you look at this picture here of Woodhaven Boulevard, and it's kind of a quaint picture of the boulevard, this is going south, so this is like going from here down towards the Rockaways. And this is Woodhaven Boulevard, that's Atlantic Avenue, and you see over there a sign, and if you look at it, it's the Wilmax Bar and Grill. So that's the place. They later changed their name to the Willow, but that is the place where this murder happened that we'll be looking at. And here's the fancy Wilmax today, changed their name to the equally classy Port Old Hall. Right?
Plus. 2 P's.
Is it really? I don't know. I've never. And there's another look at the Port Old Hall
What
Club.
was it before that?
I'm sorry?
I remember going there as a teenager. What was it before that? Do you remember the name?
No, I think it's been a topless bar all those years. What, did you work there, or did you just go there?
It used to be a regular club back
All right.
in the late 70s.
Oh, I think I know. What's that called?
No.
So again,
Oh,
that was it. That was it there. So yeah, this was the headline again in December of 1965. This happened. December 20. This is a headline from December 23rd. And the man in there, Mr. Campbell, was 50 years old, was a Woodhaven resident, and was killed by this man here, Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan, who really deserved that nickname. And he was a brutal killer. He was a hitman with the Irish Mafia, and was really notorious. And if you Google his name, you will find a lot of information about this guy. And he ended up escaping from prison and murdering someone else, and then being put back in prison for life, where he is to this day. This was him after he escaped and was caught again. And then this is him probably about 5 or 6 years ago. Being interviewed. And that's the thing with some of these killers, they get glorified, and having them sit down for interviews and things like that, kind of does glorify their acts. But Now this one has particular resonance, and it's funny, someone had posted on this on Facebook about this. If you saw recently, the last couple of days, there was a girl went missing here in Woodhaven, and family put flyers all around. It was all over social media, and it was a young girl who went missing. And anytime that happens, it's a scary thing. In this particular case, this morning the girl came home. You know, she had a fight with a boyfriend. She left, and you know, in this case here, it does not have a happy ending. Theresa, I'm going to ask people how do you pronounce that name? Is that Riccio? So Theresa, a young girl who went missing on May 10, 1968, and this was huge news here in Woodhaven. For when a young adult goes missing, you at least know that they can take care of themselves and defend for themselves. But when a 4-year-old goes missing, you know something's wrong. She's described 3 feet tall, 35 pounds, and then they've done an exhaustive search. From her house down by Elder Lane she lived, and they went. There's her address, 7411 87th Avenue, and they did a search of Cypress Hill Cemetery, Mount Hope, Forest Park. So they did searches all around looking for her. This was her house right here. You can see there's Jamaica Avenue. There's Elders Lane right here. So now right over there you got the Franklin Lane, you got the cemetery, and the search just like went out from there in all directions, looking for this young girl. It's a nice little effect there, isn't it? So I got to do this a couple times because I spent about 25 minutes on this. So you got to get used to it. The thing is, they were looking all over, and right there you can see that little house right there.
Yeah.
That's where she was. That's where her body was. She was found in the attic in that house. A 16-year-old boy who lived around the corner was arrested for the murder. Did a lot. I mean, when you read about it, it's a very, very, very tough thing. But basically, when they started questioning everyone, he was the last person to see her. He saw her out in the street, and then he said that was it. But there was some discrepancies in his story, and the police kept on questioning him, and finally he broke down and not only confessed, but told the police that where they could find the body, and then went to his house, and up in the attic is where the little girl was. So, a horrible thing for all families involved, not only obviously for the family of the girl, but the family of the boy, when he's questioned, to be defending him because it's your son, and then to have to come to the acceptance of this monstrous act that your son did, and that you were sleeping in the same house as this young girl's body. This is from the funeral at St. Thomas the Apostle. As they note down there, it was an 11-day search. So the family were dangling on the hook for 11 days, waiting to find out, what happened to her. And, so it was a really tragic story, one that gripped the entire neighborhood. And you'll notice on Facebook when people talk about it, they had even young people involved in the search. As they were going through the park and stuff, there were a lot of people that remember it vividly taking part in that search. So the neighborhood was really invested in what happened to this young girl, and to have this to be the thing. There are people today that still talk about it and get upset and emotional talking about it. The killer, 17-year-old now, this is a year later, Vincent DeRosa, pled guilty to first degree manslaughter. And then before the judge, he actually, broke down and admitted that. Let's see. He took Theresa to the basement. First, he took her to the basement of his home. And this doesn't get too gruesome, folks, because he is scant on details. He remembered stuffing a rag in her mouth to prevent outcries, and then after finding that she was lifeless, he placed her body in a suitcase and wrapped it with plastic sheets before hiding in the attic. So they don't really say what happened. They kind of gloss over it. And the judge asked him, do you now feel better having gotten it off your chest? So this was the house of young Theresa that she left from, and these were the garages right over here that he was last seen speaking to her, right there. You could actually, look at her house right here, and you can imagine the family looking all over, trying to find this young girl, and yet she was right in this house, right here, right within view. Horrible realization. It's kind of a weird thing, though. I mean, she was up here, I guess, up in the attic in this house right here. And when I looked at this house on the Google Street View, no matter which angle I was looking at it, there was like this big blurry spot up here where the attic would be. Kind of.
Could be that it was got rid of the attic.
No, I don't know. It's just blurry. I don't know. It's just weird. All right. The murder of Kimberly Antonakos. This is another a really bad one. A little bit more recent. Young girl, 1996, and she's the college student, the only daughter of Thomas Antonakos. He was a very wealthy man. I mean, the family had means; they had money. She was kidnapped in March 1995. She got out of her car to open her garage. But basically what happened was one of her girlfriend's friends, this guy, his family couldn't stay in their house anymore because it was getting renovated, the place they were renting. And she very kindly said, the guy, his mother, the little sister, come stay with me. You can live with me. She opened her door and they moved in. And it was that guy that ended up killing her because he saw how much money she had. The man who was invited into her home, Joshua Torres, he hired two young men, or two friends of his, Jose Negron and Nicholas Libretti, and they were the ones that kidnapped her. They basically punched her and threw her into a trunk of a car. The plan was to ask her father for a $75,000 ransom. That was the whole plan. It was just a kidnapping. The problem is when you kidnap people for a ransom, you've actually got to contact the people that ask for the money, and they never got in touch with the man. Why that never happened, they've never been able to figure out. Whether they said something about said they didn't know how to leave a message. I mean, us nowadays, that sounds funny, not being able to contact people, but this was 20 years ago. He said he never received a message. They never got a message, and he had the money that he said he would have gladly paid that. Now, she was brought to an abandoned home here in Woodhaven. The thing to remember about it is she lived in Brooklyn. The kidnappers lived in Brooklyn. She was originally from Staten Island. This really had nothing to do with Woodhaven, except for the fact that they knew of an abandoned home here in the neighborhood that they could use. And if you've ever passed by any of these abandoned houses and you see them, they've got broken windows, no heat or anything. Well, they had her tied up to a chair in the basement for 3 days. So basically exposure, no food, and sitting in the freezing cold.
Was that the house where they put her on fire?
Yes.
That's around the corner from...
Yes. So by March 4th, she wasn't looking well. So Joshua Torres decided it was better to get rid of the evidence than to deal with it anymore. So he poured some gasoline on her, kissed her on the forehead, and then said the last words she would ever hear. Life sucks.
Yeah.
That's cold.
Yeah.
This was the house
Uh-huh.
right here, 7808 86th Avenue.
Yeah.
Abandoned house, and you can tell, you know, with the broken windows and everything. I mean, we've seen houses like this around the neighborhood, you know, and you fight to get them boarded up. This was the location of it, right here. The New York Times covered this extensively. You know, there was some question whether she was alive or not when she was burned, but they basically said yes, she was. City examiner's officer said they poured an accelerant on her and set her afire. Our opinion was she was alive when they did this. Whether she was conscious or not, we didn't know. And down here at the bottom it says her body was bound to a chair in the basement of a house at 7808 86th Avenue in Richmond Hill.
That could help our voting.
You know, the media never knows where
I
Woodhaven
know the
is.
house.
They never know where Woodhaven is. They always get it wrong.
That house is out.
This was a big story all around the city, and two men were arrested for this eventually. So basically what happened was, when things like this happen, you have people that know what happened and they start talking. And in a case like this, that's what happened. The police finally narrowed it down and were able to arrest 2 of the 3 men. One of the 3 men they couldn't arrest, Jose Negron. They were not able to arrest him because the main guy, Joshua Torres, shot him in the head and killed him because he was getting ready to talk to the police. So he was found in jail with a bullet in his head on the street corner in Jamaica, Queens. The police said that Mr. Torres killed his fellow conspirator because he feared that Mr. Negron was about to turn him in. Here's her father. When you read about her father, it's a real tragic story. He never recovered from it. It was his only daughter. And what it said was he frequently came to Woodhaven and stood in front of the house asking people, did you see anything? Do you know anything? You know, and just constantly asking. And then what he used to do was, and this is interesting, he used to go all around and he used to tear $50 bills in half to write his phone number on them and hand them out to people, asking kind of information. This way, if you call them information, you know, the other half for 50. So, but he just never got over her death. Finally, there's a guilty verdict, Mr. Torres, and it actually comes the day before what would have been her birthday, her 22nd birthday. And here's an article in the Times where he goes to her grave to, you know, to the father to let her know about this. Other defendants, Jose Negron was murdered. And as it turns out, Joshua Torres, even though they knew he did it, was acquitted of that murder. Julio Negron, who was one of the kidnappers, pled guilty, received 2 to 6 years in prison.
How was he acquitted? They know he did it.
Didn't have evidence. I mean, yeah, a jury.
Yeah, didn't have enough.
And then Joshua Torres was convicted of her murder, and he was sentenced to 58 years to life in prison. The earliest release date is August 31st, 2045. And his age, earliest age that he'll be upon release, 72 years old. Anyway, we hope he's had many painful romances. The father, Thomas Antonakos, passed away in 2005, and from all accounts, just carried this with him, until he died. His life was destroyed and was never the same. there is the tombstone of the whole family, the mother, father, and the daughter. It was the subject of a book, which I really wish they had chosen a better title, you know, The Little Town.
That's like terrible, that
Sounds like something Alfred Hitchcock would have thought of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, there's the house that this happened in, and here it is today.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, when you go around, not only this neighborhood, any neighborhood, when you see all the houses, you know, they're characters in their own stories. There are things that have happened in all of these houses. When they talk about a place being historical or significant, there are houses all over where things have happened. People who are living in these houses have no idea what happened.
I wouldn't want to know.
I really don't know. I mean, it was abandoned, but I don't know if you have to tell anyone. I don't know if that's a law. Mike, what do you know? Do you have to tell, if someone was murdered in your house, do you have to tell the prospective buyers? Yeah. What? I don't know. Put it this way, I wouldn't.
I wouldn't want to know.
Yeah.
No. You tell me I wouldn't want to buy a house then. No.
If you have a friend in the police department, they can just.
Yeah.
The murder of Reina Isabel de los Santos.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to know.
So here's Reina. Edwin Fuentes, who was her husband, or boyfriend rather, and he was a former butcher. This will come into play later on. I'm sorry, I know you guys are eating. He called 911 June 2007 to report the disappearance of his wife. You'll see, I'm not really sure what their marital status was, because at times they referred to as boyfriend and girlfriend and husband and wife. So I think they were kind of living together, common law, husband and wife. Officer from the 102nd Precinct, responded to the home on 88th Road. Said she noticed Fuentes was nervous and had scratches on his arms as well as a bite mark on his left hand. This, as Ike will explain to you sometime, is known as a clue.
What do you think?
So this is where the location of the house is. It's right over by Nearest Tavern, right by Walter's Funeral Home, and there's the house right there. Again, another nice house that you pass by a million times and never think that something horrible happened in there. And again, if you know anyone that lives in this house, don't tell them. I'm always waiting for the day that I give one of these presentations and someone in the back of the room goes, "Oh crap, that's my house." Here is Mr. Fuentes right here, putting out missing person signs all over Woodhaven. Very concerned. And then a few years later, some young boys walking through Forest Park find a suitcase and decide to open it and see what was inside, and found a large number of bones.
Yeah.
And then finally, one thing led to another, and then after he was arrested, I guess he or somehow they found the rest of it. I think
Did
it
they
was.
find the suitcase?
Yeah, they found a suitcase up there.
Found a suitcase. It was up not far from Forest Parkway and
Yeah.
Parkway and South.
Yeah.
And these guys are over by the dog run.
Yeah.
No, I'll tell you exactly where it is.
No, there we go.
It's on Forest Parkway and Parkway South. When you walk up that
Yeah,
flight of stairs,
right near
you
me.
walk right at the top of the
Right
stairs.
by me.
Right at the top. Okay.
The reason I know that is because I was driving by that day and I saw
I
the
remember
crime
when
scene
they
there.
Oh yeah.
I saw the cops there.
Hold on a second, everybody. Hold on. I got something.
So I called the station house. I said, "Look, what's going on? I live in the neighborhood and I'm retired from the job." He says, "Oh, the guy, the murderer, the husband, as part of the plea deal, he had to confess to where he buried the body, and that's how they got to find out. That was part of the plea deal, is that he had to show where the remains were left, the family system, and that's what that was. It's at the top of the stairs at Forest Parkway and Parkway South, on the right hand side as you're going north.
So bones in the suitcase belong to the missing woman.
It was buried.
How many years ago was that?
I'm gonna say maybe 8 years ago.
8 years ago?
2007.
Yeah, 2007. Yeah, that's right.
2007 she disappeared. 2011
Right.
when they found him.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember
Yep.
this. Yeah. That's my niece.
So that's where it was.
That's where I live. No, but I'm having that.
Oh, wait, hold on, we have an answer here on deaths in the house, here we go.
Google's the greatest thing. In California, the seller must reveal if a death in the home has occurred any time in the past 3 years, including death by natural causes. In Alaska and South Dakota, only murders or suicides must be disclosed if they happen within the past year. Every other state, I guess, better.
All right,
You
know what?
Alaska and South Dakota.
you're free to do what you want. It's not gonna affect the sales, don't worry. So, here we go after the story, after the arrest. 2 years after the wife's dismembered body was found in a suitcase in Forest Park,
Right.
a Woodhaven man was charged with her murder. Fuentes, a former butcher, called 911 to report the disappearance of his wife. This was interesting. You saw that picture earlier of him putting the flyers
Yeah.
up around. Later, this is a portion of an article. A relative described seeing flyers that she had posted in the neighborhood, urging residents to call police with any information, had been covered up with new flyers that contained only a photo of the missing woman and Fuente's number. Pretty clever, right? He's like, hey, call me. And I'm like, hey, I know who did it. He's like, okay, thanks. When asked by police if he thought he was going to get away with murder, Fuentes allegedly told him, I'm sure as hell going to try. How about that?
I mean, it sounds like something from that Earl Stanley Gardner in one of his Perry Mason books.
Right. Very dramatic. And here he is in court.
Just like with that Boston murder case.
Oh, hold on a second here. Hold on. Hope you guys are enjoying this at home.
Yes,
We're
very
all,
much. Very much. Be careful of the wire.
all right. So this is Edwin Fuentes in court. Fuentes, a former butcher, admitted that he strangled his wife and cut up her body, placing part in a suitcase which he hid in Forest Park, the DA said. Teenagers discovered his suitcase containing the remains about a year later, and dental records matched those of De Los Santos. As part of the plea deal, as I said before, Fuentes showed police where the remainder of the body parts are hidden, the DA said, and the NYPD located a bag of what appeared to be human remains in Forest Park Tuesday. So the butcher, convicted of chopping up his wife and hiding her remains, sentenced to 20 years in prison. So he didn't get away with it. I would argue that 20 years is getting away with it, but still. And then there were people and organizations that called his deal a raw deal. That felt he should have gotten more time than 20 years. And one of the allegations they made was that Mr. Fuentes was a police informant, that he was involved with the police. At the Shamrock Bar Murders, which will be our last murder case of this evening. So this is 1981. Tragedy strikes, double murder in Woodhaven. Again, for those of you playing at home, murder was not invented in Woodhaven in recent years. And this, I don't think there has ever been a more senseless or brutal murder in Woodhaven that just took the lives of two good men. Here we go, interior shot of the Shamrock Bar.
Jamaica Avenue. 8606 Jamaica Avenue.
This is Shamrock Bar Road. This is after the incident. So basically, what happened here is the Shamrock Bar Grill. There were two men that were operating it, Richard Godkin and John Dagnese. Recently, one of the local papers, I got into a brouhaha with them because they had an article in which it referred to these guys as mobster wannabes. They were anything but that. Richard Godkin ran the boys club. Hey, how are you? Richard Godkin ran the boys club over there on Atlantic Avenue. And as you'll see, he was very, very involved in the community, but he wanted to get a little bit of extra money for the family. And what did he do? He opened up he had a bar. There was a bar that had been there for a while. He bought into it with his partner, John Dagnese, who was also part of the boys club. And the two of them ran this together. One night, when they're down there around 2:30 in the morning, there was one guy who was getting noisy because someone had spilled a drink on his suit. And they asked him finally, because he was getting so out of hand, they asked him to leave. And he left with a female companion, but he told them he was going to return. He threatened that he was going to return. A little while later, he comes back with a couple of friends carrying guns. They shoot into the ceiling, and eventually what ends up happening is Dagnese is struck, and he's shot in the head. And Godkin runs to help his partner, and then he's shot in the chest. And both of them are pronounced dead at the scene. This was, for those of you who lived in Woodhaven at the time, remember, this was shocking stuff. It was 1981. This was the kind of crime that really just hit at everybody, because this was a place on our avenue. The Shamrock Bar was a place a lot of people knew of. If they hadn't been in there in recent years, they passed by it a million times. And the men were known in the community. Again, here's the interior of it. Here's another shot of the inside crime scene photograph.
When did they close that bar?
Actually, as it turns out, I'll show you a picture of it later on. It stayed open beyond this. Just a little. I'm going to breeze past this, but just to give you an idea, these are articles from the Leader Observer, Richard Godkin, new directors of Boy Club. He was a Vietnam veteran. He came home and he wanted to get involved. And then all through the Leader Observer, all these years, there is one article after another about the family. Especially, John Dagnese is in here, but he's more of the quiet one. Richard Godkin is the public figure, who starts, there's this quote here that he says quite a, our primary aim, this is what he's talking about young people, what the Boys Club is good for. Our primary aim is to show that the delinquency problem can be solved when youngsters are subjected to positive, productive, and responsible pursuits. So his goal was to help young people. This was someone that was good and positive for the community. And, the loss of people like this leaves a gigantic hole in the community, and that's what these murders did. Here's Mr. Godkin over on the right, getting a check from Columbia Savings Bank, and that's for their new swimming pool. This is from the New York Racing Association. Again, Mr. Godkin over here. So, as you look through the newspapers in the 70s, he was someone that you were familiar with. He was someone, and I can tell you, my father was involved in the Little League, and he spoke to this guy several times. I don't say that they were buddies or best friends, but with the Little League and the Boys Club, you had dealings with each other, and they spoke a couple of times. So when this happened, my dad had always said to me, what a tremendous hole that left in the community, because that was someone that was doing so much for the young people. Again, Mr. Godkin here with Congressman Joe Adabo over here. This is kind of a cool picture for you guys that remember the swimming pool at the Boys Club. I do remember the swimming pool of the Boys Club. I have nightmares about the swimming pool of the Boys Club. This is a place of bullies and big boys that used to beat me up. Listen, I could talk about that for hours, but we're not here for that. But that's them turning on the tap for that pool for the first time. And again, who's turning it on? Mr. Godkin. You know, here he is presenting an award to the National Boy of the Year, who's from the area.
No.
Barry Quackenbush.
Quackenbush, wow.
Again, you know, I mean, as you go, I showed these, and actually I put this part of the presentation together after the one paper had called him a mobster wannabe, because I got angry because they were missing the whole point of this crime. It was really a terrific person that was killed.
Yeah,
And you'll see this picture. This was kind of like his family's picture of him. This is a nice story. Brian Godkin was 8 when his father was shot to death. The boy grew up to be a marshal, and then he went looking for the killer. The son refused, because you got to remember, they didn't arrest anyone for this crime. You know? Actually, I think I messed this up here. There's a picture behind here of the place afterwards. After it was the Shamrock Bar, it stayed a bar for a little while, and it changed its name. Does anyone remember what the name was? No, not the circus bar. No, as far as we know, there were no murders in either the circus or the White Horse.
Is it on the corner?
No, I'll show you where it was in a minute. But
Frankie and John.
Nino's Pub. Nino's Pub for a couple of years. But really nice story, and I'd love to talk to this gentleman here, Brian Godkin, today. He never gave up. He never gave up. He went looking for the killer. Now, one of the gentlemen, I don't want to use the word gentleman for these killers. I'm sorry. One of the dirtbags was arrested early on, but ended up being acquitted. But many years later, one of the other murderers who was on the run was arrested, and one of the witnesses was the bartender. And this gentleman, and he's a gentleman because he was a good guy, but when the first guy was acquitted, it was basically because he couldn't come forward and tell what he saw. He was afraid. But now, many years later, this is just a few years ago, it was like 2 years ago, he came forward and he testified what he saw. And this first guy here, this is one of the killers, Frank Ricardo. Now, this is what he looked like when, shortly, before he did the killing. This is his high school picture. They released these sketches trying to find him, over the first couple of years, and they were looking for him. And they figured he might, change his appearance by shaving his head, growing a beard, shaving head and growing a beard, putting a mustache, all different variations. And, they put this all out trying to find him. And here he is when they actually did arrest him. That's him being brought to court. He don't look like any of these, does he? I mean, you can see it's him if you look at the face.
Yeah.
But
They got very skinny.
But he ended up beating this rat, and then he ended up dying shortly after that. There's that other man here, Bartolomeo Bernacci. This is him after he's been arrested, and he is being brought in to trial, and he ends up getting life in prison for these murders.
What year was that? They called him.
That they caught him and arrested. This is 2014. This is just a couple years ago. So even though he was finally caught and jailed, it took many years. But the thing is, justice, finally prevailed. So we started this off early on with a case where justice was extremely swift, and when they came in, they brought somebody to and basically executed them. And here we are all these years later, and it's a very slow case of justice, but again, justice did prevail, and then his punishment is life in prison. So that is the end of our presentation.
Thank you.
We end on a. end up on the high note that he did get life in prison. And again, we also hope that he has many painful romances to write in his diary. So I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And we'll be back here again on the first Tuesday next month. And we hope those of you watching at home will come out and join us at the Avenue Diner, 9106 Jamaica Avenue. So thank you.